2:14 a.m. The detective squad room is in chaos. 3 murders in 3 days, no suspects, no motive, no pattern. Detective Morrison slams his fist on the desk. We're missing something obvious. Meanwhile, Carlos, quietly mopping the floor in the corner, stops and murmurs under his breath. Not the canal, check the bridge. By morning, everyone would learn who Carlos really was. Carlos Mendoza, 62 years old, has been pushing a mop bucket through the halls of the 14th precinct for 8 years. But his story began long before these fluorescent-lit corridors became his nightly routine. Born in Miami to Cuban immigrants, Carlos had always possessed an unusual gift. He could see patterns where others saw chaos. At 19, he joined the Miami Police Department. Within 5 years, he became the youngest detective in the department's history. For 25 years, Detective Carlos Mendoza was a legend. His colleagues called him the Prophet because he could predict where criminals would strike next, identify killers from the smallest inconsistencies, and solve cases that everyone else had given up on. But life has a way of humbling even the greatest. In 2015, Carlos worked a case that consumed him, a serial killer targeting young women. He became obsessed, worked around the clock, ignored his family. When he finally caught the killer, it was too late. His wife had left, taking their daughter. The department offered him a promotion. He refused and took early retirement instead. The pension wasn't enough. Carlos moved to a small apartment in a rough neighborhood. When he needed extra income, he saw a job posting for a night janitor at the 14th precinct, the same building where he'd once commanded respect. He applied under a slightly altered name, listing only his high school education. Nobody recognized the broken man in custodian uniform as the legendary detective who'd worked those very halls decades ago. That night, Detective Sarah Morrison, no relation to Carlos's old partner, was facing the biggest case of her career. 3 victims in 3 days, all young professionals, all found in the Canal District. No witnesses, no forensic evidence, no apparent connection between victims. The FBI profiler arrives tomorrow, Morrison announced to her team, her voice tight with frustration. If we don't have something by then, this becomes a federal case and we look incompetent. Detective James Chen, 28, fresh from the academy with top honors, pulled up crime scene photos on the monitor. Victim 1, Marcus Riley, investment banker. Victim 2, Jennifer Wu, software engineer. Victim 3, Thomas Anders, attorney. Different neighborhoods, different social circles, different everything. There's no pattern. There has to be a pattern, insisted Detective Lisa Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran. Random killers leave traces. This is planned. Methodical N. Carlos was emptying trash cans near the conference room, moving slowly, listening. He'd heard these same frustrated conversations 100 times in his career. The younger detectives were doing everything by the book. Databases, forensics, algorithms. But they were missing what he could see clearly. Morrison pulled up a map showing the 3 crime scenes, all found in the Canal District, but different sections. Victim 1 North End, Victim 2 East Side, Victim 3 South Entrance. No geographical pattern. Carlos paused his work, staring at the map on the monitor through the glass partition. His trained eye immediately recognized something they'd missed. Detective Chen continued. Forensics came back clean. No DNA, no fibers, no fingerprints. Whoever this is knows how to avoid evidence. Too clean, muttered Morrison. Professional hit? But why these 3? They're not connected to organized crime. Carlos quietly moved his mop bucket closer to the conference room. Captain Williams, a stern woman in her 50s who ran the precinct with efficiency, walked past without acknowledging him. To her, he was furniture, necessary but invisible. We're running background checks on all 3 victims again, said Rodriguez, looking for any connection. And shared gym memberships, coffee shops, anything. What about the water? Carlos said quietly, still mopping. The detectives looked up, surprised that the janitor had spoken. Excuse me? Morrison said, her tone sharp. We're in the middle of a briefing. The water levels, Carlos repeated, keeping his eyes down. The canal. Check the water levels for the past week. Chen laughed. The janitor is giving us investigative advice now? Security. Can we have some privacy here? Captain Williams called out N. But Morrison held up her hand. Something in the old man's voice made her pause. What about the water levels? Carlos knew he should stop, walk away, stay invisible, but he'd taken an oath as a police officer, and that oath didn't expire when you traded a badge for a mop. The canal district floods when it rains. Water rises 6 feet. Bodies would move, drift downstream, but all 3 victims were found in their original locations. No drift. The room went silent. Morrison pulled up weather data on her tablet. It rained heavily 3 nights ago, right between victim 2 and victim 3, so the bodies weren't in the water, Rodriguez said slowly, understanding dawning. They were placed after the rain, which means, Carlos continued, his detective instincts overriding his custodian persona, the killer waited for the rain to stop before placing bodies. He's not dumping them randomly, he's staging them. Check the bridge walkways above each location. Morrison's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up satellite imagery of the canal area. Above each crime scene location was a pedestrian bridge. Son of a bitch. They were dropped from above. That's why there's no evidence at the scene. The killer never touched the ground. Captain Williams stood up, looking at Carlos differently now. Who are you? Before Carlos could answer, the emergency call came through. Another victim. This time, someone saw the killer on the bridge. All units suspect on the pedestrian bridge at Canal Section 4. White male, dark hoodie, fleeing north. Morrison grabbed her radio. We're 2 minutes out. Captain, get patrol units to block the north exits. As the detectives rushed out, Carlos looked at the map, still displayed on the monitor. Something was wrong. The pattern wasn't complete. The killer wouldn't run north. That was too obvious. And, wait! Carlos called out, his voice carrying the command of someone used to being obeyed. Morrison turned, annoyed. We don't have time for janitor theories right now. He won't go north. Look at the pattern. Carlos moved to the computer, his janitorial humility forgotten. Victims 1, 2, 3. They form an arc. East, south, west. The next position should be northwest, not north. And the bridges, they're not random. They're access points to the old maintenance tunnels under the canal district. Chen was already out the door. We're wasting time listening to the cleaning guy. But Rodriguez stayed, studying the map. Carlos, if that's your real name, what are you seeing? The killer knows the tunnel system. He's using the bridges as entry points. When patrol blocks the north exit, he won't run. He'll go down into the tunnels. You need to seal the maintenance access points. Morrison made a split-second decision. Rodriguez, get maintenance tunnel schematics. Chen, come with me. Captain, I'm calling tunnel maintenance now, Williams said, her phone already to her ear. Carlos sat down at the computer, his computer from when this had been his squad room, and pulled up the city's infrastructure database with practiced ease. There are 6 tunnel access points. The killer will use the one at 3rd and Harbor. It connects to the old subway system. How do you know the database password? Chen demanded, still lingering in the doorway. Because I said it, Carlos said quietly. 20 years ago, the precinct fell silent except for the humming of computers and the distant police sirens. Captain Williams lowered her phone slowly. Carlos Mendoza. Detective Carlos Mendoza. You're the N prophet. N was. Carlos corrected. I'm a janitor now. The hell you are, Morrison said, grabbing his arm. You're coming with us. If you're right about those tunnels, I'm right. They took 3 patrol cars and an emergency response unit to 3rd and Harbor. Carlos, still in his janitor uniform, rode in Morrison's vehicle. For the first time in 8 years, he felt alive. Why didn't you tell us who you were? Morrison asked as they sped through empty streets. Would you have hired me? A washed-up detective with a breakdown on his record? Better to be invisible. You solved the pattern in 5 minutes that took us 3 days to miss. You were looking at data. I was looking at behavior. The killer is organized, patient. He plans every detail. But he's also theatrical, staging bodies in public places. That's ego. And ego follows patterns. They reach the tunnel entrance just as a figure emerged from the shadows. Dark hoodie, carrying something. He saw the police cars, and ran back down into the darkness. "He's in the tunnels!" Chen shouted, drawing his weapon. And Morrison coordinated with dispatch while the tactical team prepared to enter. But Carlos was already moving toward the tunnel entrance, his muscle memory taking over. "Mendoza, wait!" Morrison called. "You're not armed. You're not authorized." "I know these tunnels," Carlos said. "I chased the Riverside Killer through here in 1998. There are 3 exits. You need to cover all 3 or he'll escape." Captain Williams arrived in a second vehicle. Everyone listened to Mendoza. "Chen, take 2 officers to the south exit. Rodriguez, cover the east maintenance shaft. Morrison, you're with me at this entrance." "What about me?" Carlos asked. Williams handed him a radio. "You're our navigator. Guide them." For the next 40 minutes, Carlos became what he once was, a detective orchestrating a manhunt. His voice over the radio was calm, precise, directing officers through the maze of tunnels based on memory and instinct. "Chen, he'll double back through the junction at marker 47. Rodriguez, move to your left. There's a maintenance ladder he might use. How do you know all this?" Chen asked over the radio, his earlier skepticism gone. "Because I've been him," Carlos said. "I've thought like him. He's trapped, but he doesn't feel trapped. He thinks he's smarter than you. He thinks he knows these tunnels. But I know them better." "I see him!" Rodriguez's voice crackled through, heading toward the old subway platform. "Don't chase," Carlos said firmly. "He wants you to chase. That platform has 3 exits. Cover them all and wait. He'll come to you." They did exactly as Carlos instructed. And 15 minutes later, the suspect emerged directly into Rodriguez's position. He was arrested without incident. Back at the precinct at 6 a.m., as dawn broke over the city, the suspect was being processed. Jonathan Mitchell, 34, a former city maintenance worker who'd been fired 2 years ago. He knew the tunnels, he knew the bridges, and he'd been staging murders to mock the police department that he felt had failed to investigate when his complaints about working conditions went ignored. In the interrogation room, Mitchell sat calmly, his attorney beside him. Detective Morrison entered with Carlos in. "This is highly irregular," the attorney protested. "Who is this man? He's not even in detective clothing." "This is Carlos Mendoza," Morrison said, "and he's the one who caught your client." Mitchell looked up at Carlos in his janitor uniform. "You? You're just the old guy who cleans the floors." "I am," Carlos agreed, "and for 8 years I've been watching this precinct operate. I've seen every case file left on every desk. I've overheard every briefing. I know more about active investigations than anyone here because I'm invisible. People say things around janitors they'd never say around detectives." Mitchell's expression changed. "You've been watching us?" "No," Carlos corrected. "I've been watching behavior, yours included. You came to the precinct 4 times in the past year, complaining about being fired, making threats. Everyone dismissed you as a crank. But I noticed you always came on Thursday mornings. I noticed you always studied the Canal District map on the public board. I noticed you asked about bridge maintenance schedules." The attorney stood up. "This is entrapment. This man was spying. This man was doing his job," Captain Williams said, entering the room, cleaning floors and observing. Everything he saw was in plain sight, and everything he heard was said in public spaces. Mitchell's confession came 2 hours later. The evidence found in his apartment confirmed everything Carlos had predicted. That afternoon, Captain Williams called Carlos to her office, the same office where 20 years ago he'd received his detective shield. "Carlos, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything, Captain." "Yes, I do. We had a legend working in our building and we made him push a mop. That's unacceptable. I chose the mop, Captain. After what happened, after I lost my family to this job, I couldn't be a detective anymore. The weight of it." "I understand. But Carlos, we need you. Not as a detective, if that's too much, but as something. We can't afford to lose your gift." Carlos looked out the window at the city he'd protected for decades. "What did you have in mind?" "Consultant, civilian analyst. You'd review cold cases, provide insights on active investigations, mentor young detectives. No badge, no gun, no field work if you don't want it. But your experience would be available to us when we need it." "Would I still clean?" Williams smiled. "If you want to. Though I suspect the detectives might start leaving more case files on their desks, hoping you'll overhear something useful." Carlos laughed. For the first time in 8 years, he laughed. Over the following months, Carlos became the precinct's secret weapon. He still wore his janitor uniform. It made people comfortable, made them forget to guard their words. But now he also spent hours in the case room, his insights helping close investigations that had gone cold. Detective Morrison became his closest colleague. "You know what the most valuable thing you've taught me?" she asked one night as he mopped near her desk. "What's that?" "That the best detectives aren't always the ones with the best technology or the highest education. They're the ones who understand human behavior, who see patterns, who listen." Carlos nodded. "In my day, we called it instinct. Now you call it profiling. But it's the same thing. Understanding that criminals are human, and humans are predictable if you know what to look for." 6 months later, Carlos was invited to speak at the police academy. The auditorium was full of young cadets in crisp uniforms, eager to learn from legends. He walked onto the stage in his janitor uniform, pushing his mop bucket. The cadets looked confused until Captain Williams introduced him. "This is Carlos Mendoza." Some of you may have heard of him as the Prophet, one of the greatest detectives in this city's history. "He's going to teach you the most important lesson you'll learn here." Carlos looked out at the young faces. "For 8 years, I cleaned floors in a police precinct. I was invisible. And in that invisibility, I saw things that visible people miss. I learned that the most valuable information doesn't come from databases or technology. It comes from observation, from listening, from understanding that criminals are people and people have patterns." He paused, letting that sink in. "You'll learn procedures, laws, techniques. Those are important. But the most important tool you have is here." He tapped his temple. "And here." He placed his hand over his heart. "Experience and intuition. Don't ever discount them. And don't ever discount the wisdom of people around you, even if they're wearing custodian uniforms." The case that made Carlos famous again was the Riverside Killer cold case, a serial murderer from 1997 who'd never been caught. With modern DNA technology and Carlos's memory of the investigation, they finally identified and arrested the killer in 2024, bringing closure to families who'd waited 27 years for justice, but Carlos never stopped being a janitor. He still arrived at the precinct at 10 p.m., still pushed his mop bucket through the halls, but now detectives stopped to ask his opinion. Patrol officers shared observations. Even Captain Williams would find him and say, "Carlos, got a minute? I need another set of eyes on something." What saved that investigation wasn't modern technology, advanced degrees, or sophisticated databases. It was Carlos's 25 years of experience, his ability to see patterns under pressure, and the quiet wisdom that everyone had overlooked because it was hidden behind a mop bucket. Sometimes the greatest expertise is doing the humblest job. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the person cleaning your floors knows more about solving crimes than anyone in a three-piece suit carrying a gold badge. In a world increasingly dependent on technology and credentials, Carlos Mendoza reminded everyone that human experience, instinct, and observation can still solve cases, and that wisdom doesn't retire just because the badge does.